Hello, I'm Tony Vlahos for ExecuNet. Thanks as always for tuning in. Companies will always need senior executives. At the same time, they don't want an executive who has one foot, say, off the playing field. So what is a midlife or older worker to do? And what do hiring organizations need to do to promote age diversity? With me to share advice on how to diminish age bias in the senior executive job search is Jason Hanold. Jason is the CEO and managing partner of Hanold Associates, the leading retained boutique executive search firm specializing in human resources leadership recruiting. Jason, it's good to be talking to you.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here today.
Lovely. So before we cut to the subject of age bias, Jason, if it's all right, I'd like to start by asking about the state of executive recruiting in 2021. We're emerging from, pick your adjective, the craziest, wackiest, most uncertain of years. And I'm just curious what some of the challenges and opportunities that are presenting themselves to you look like.
Yeah, so 2021, we enter it with a sense of optimism, a sense of so happy that we're looking at 2020 in the rearview mirror and looking forward to everyone eventually getting back to, it won't be necessarily the same, but back to a new sense of appreciation around their colleagues when they see their colleagues and their friends and all that. And so there's a lot of optimism in executive search. And even from last year, those in some functional areas did still well and incredibly well, because as maybe some industries were hurt more than others started to thrive. And so, but at this time last year, those firms that did well didn't know they were going to do well, right? Everybody was scared of the uncertainty. And so we're now facing an economy that feels much more certain, knock wood, than what we had last year.
Okay, are there any reservations that firms have as they lean into the second quarter of the year? Are there things that they saw in the first quarter they didn't expect to see, either by sector or type of search? What's your take on that one, Jason?
Yeah, so we have actually had a lot of clients in retail. Major retailers are coming to us for executive searches, and the common thought is, well, they've taken a beating. Well, those who are innovating and those who are changing their platforms have still done well, and they're recovering well. Even though they did take a hit. The good news for most is they didn't take a hit alone last year, right? And so there's the sense of coming out together, but it's been a cathartic, innovative factor, the pandemic, in terms of how companies need to pivot, whether they need to pivot, and how they then conduct business. And so there are a lot of organizations, our clients included, who are doing incredibly well now. They were doing well before the pandemic, and even better, Zoom being one of them. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York being another. And what you're hearing from organizations in terms of what are their challenges is if there's a sense of uncertainty, it's around themes such as, what does our new workforce model look like? Do people all have to come back to the office? Are some, is it not as important for all of us to be there? I spoke with a major retailer this morning, and their thought was, well, although we're based in the Midwest, we've now decided that executives don't necessarily have to be based here, as long as they can travel into, the Midwest, LA, New York, for meetings. And that really starts to open the aperture for the kinds of talent and the types of people you can go after and recruit for roles like this, especially if someone can be in Dallas and then travel to New York if they want to, versus relocating a family to, the Midwest, if that isn't in the cards for everybody in the family. And so organizations are right now not struggling, but they're challenged to really become comfortable with a new shape of workforce environment and where people need to be if they're going to adapt.
That's a very valuable perspective. Thank you. Let's lean into our conversation about ageism and age bias in the executive job search. I made the claim moments ago that organizations will always need senior executives. What exactly are the skills and attributes that organizations will, in fact, always need from senior workers or midlife workers?
Organizations will always need the senior executives or wisdom that comes from years of experience. Older workers have incredible pattern recognition around almost everything coming our way, including pandemics, right? Including more challenging times that were well before, many of us, had to face the new emergency that may be new to some, but not new to all. And so at times having that calm hand, right, that guiding wisdom, that's always going to be valuable at all levels of the organization, not just the senior ranks. In fact, more often than not, that type of wisdom on the front lines is most critical, because that's where some of your more junior workers tend to be. And that's where the most learning happens in an organization. And so from my perspective, and in the work we do and talking with lots of clients across industries, employers, the enlightened ones, believe that and they embrace that.
Mhm. Now, many of my senior level executive audience members, those watching us today, in fact, will say, well, Jason, I'm that person. I'm that steady hand. I have that wisdom, but I'm not seen for that. I'm actually seen for the age, the year that I was born, the gray hairs, all that stuff is seemingly in the way of getting noticed for all the right things. What do you say to an executive who's going through that?
I think there needs to be more transparency from both employers and from candidates. And what I mean by that is this. I'll always try and have a real conversation with candidates because there's realities on both sides of the table. From the candidate perspective, they don't want to address it. It's almost this hope that they're going to see me for who I am and all these experiences and want to advance. On the employer side, there's a mystery. The mystery is around, well, how long does this person want to continue working? Do they want to work well into their 70s or 80s? And so when I talk about candidacy in the sense of transparency, I think the bridge would be built much more effectively if candidates would be more prescriptive with their intentions when they're interviewing and when they're talking to employers. For instance, on the employer side, in today's market, in today's succession planning requirements, they need to know what the runway may look like, not just for the person in role, but the people they're hiring underneath them, because the responsible organization and the responsible fiduciary executive needs to have a plan B for when, executive A retires or moves on to another company or is recruited out. The responsible company will have 1 to 2 to 3 successors who can then fill that role. Companies do not want to be spending a lot of time with those of us in executive search because they don't have that talent in-house, right? And so when I'm talking to candidates, you may have a conversation, and it's always helpful for me if someone says, I want a next chapter to be another 5 to 7 years before I retire. Well, when I can articulate that, the client may have this bias or belief that if they see somebody who was, choose a year, born in the early 50s or the late 40s or what have you, they may think they're on the verge of retirement. Well, in today's market, we have people that are blowing way past, what were traditional retirement years. But it gets into a bit of a gray area where the employer's guessing and the candidate's not addressing it. But most every senior level executive search we've done, the employer is not expecting someone to be in role for 10 years. If they get 3 great years out of someone, that is worth the investment in onboarding and creating a knowledge sharing with institutional knowledge, and the wisdom and the lessons and the skills that they get from that are valuable. And so to me, I guess it's encouraging more candidates to be open about that. Because by the way, if they want someone for 10 years and you really only want to work another 5 years, that's not going to be the right fit anyway. But if someone says, well, gee, if I can have someone who has 3 years yet left, right, before they want to go do something else, and you actually are willing to work 5 to 7, well, that could be a match made in heaven. But lift off the veil of having both parties guess, because we're talking about age, but this applies to lots of other factors in the job search process. And to me, I always keep this in mind. You aren't going to hire anyone who you don't trust, and you can't possibly trust someone who you don't know. And so the more candidates reveal of themselves, their desires, their fears, right? Their big aspirations, no matter what age they are, the more a hiring employer really feels like, okay, I don't have to keep pulling information out. They've given it to me and I feel like I know them. Therefore, I trust them and let's make something happen, right? If it's compatible to a role they have.
Absolutely. So you've made the poignant case for transparency. I'm with you. Now let's presume transparency, and I'm a senior level executive who's interviewing. What should I project to my potential new boss about myself? What should I do, in other words, that I can control to steer the conversation away from age to value, for example? How do I do that?
Yeah, and that's a great point because you don't want to overemphasize age and you don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It's like one of several data points to cover as you're revealing more about yourself. One of the things, and this is a generalization, but I have a lot of data points that lean this way. More often than not, when folks are my age, right? I'm 53 and above, or in sometimes even late 40s, they tend to spend more time in the conversation talking about why they are leaving or left last organization. A future employer is certain that nothing was egregious around why you left, departed an organization, but they think about joining them and why, right? So to do is, yeah, you hit on some of these issues that are data points such as age, but then it's about conveying a sense of enthusiasm and doing your homework around why you want to join a company. Too often, older workers and executives walk into interviews with an assumption that they're going to be knocked out because they've been knocked out so many times before, right? They start to carry the weight of that emotion and dejection into conversations like this. And my coaching and my counsel to these incredibly talented workers and executives is go in with enthusiasm, assume the job is yours and project yourself in that very manner because enthusiasm is incredibly contagious. Optimism is contagious. Don't be the Eeyore in that interview or setting because of your past experiences. Don't bring that baggage for this 30 minutes or 1 hour into the conversation. Because no matter if you're a B2B or B2C, the one thing you want above all else is enthusiastic, highly engaged employees, because a more engaged employee brings a different level of discretionary effort to work every day. Mm-hmm. And when more of your employees are bringing more effort, well, guess what? You need fewer of them, right? And so it translates into true performance for that organization.
Beautifully said. Let's turn to the organizations, the hiring organizations, as well as those that don't have a present hiring need. I can't think of one, but I'm sure there are a couple out there. So what do they need to do, Jason, to promote age diversity and not make age a thing? In other words, what changes would you love to see organizations make?
If they want to promote age diversity, and this actually goes for ethnic diversity or all different kinds of, I always look for companies with their ratio of sameness in their employees and uniqueness. And those that get that ratio right just have wonderful diversity from a multidimensional perspective. And partly the way that they promote that is to celebrate it, right? So you may be an employer with 160,000 employees. And if you have only 2 people that are over 70, so everybody sees them and knows of, by the way, so someone in the field who's then going to be hiring, they may be thinking, oh, you know what? We heard all about Wilma and they're being celebrated. So in that kind of celebration, and it's not just celebration from a superficial perspective, but that's about creating awareness and the awareness. And not only that, but you're role modeling behavior in the organization around hiring and what these programs to the organization at all levels. And so you do tend to see this certainly done at the senior most levels, but to me that at the executive level, where executive team younger and younger, right? And so we've actually witnessed some client organizations where they've had young founders and then young committee affiliation, where they've actually said to us, when I said, okay, let's talk about your diversity composition on your team, because as a matter of practice, we will always develop a diverse slate. And I've actually had some clients in the last year say, yeah, you know what we need? It's not about a skin tone color. It's about a hair color. We need more gray. We're too young. Our workforce is maybe 26 years old. Not a lot of us have pattern recognition around the stage of businesses that we're going to be climbing through. And so that is going to be important to us. And that's, as one with plenty of gray myself, that's refreshing to hear.
Absolutely. And it also suggests that as executives think about the opportunities and create their short list of target companies, they should be thinking about companies that actually need that kind of help, right? Versus maybe at times a larger, very matrix organization that doesn't necessarily think that same way.
That's correct. That's right.
Okay. One last question, Jason, not about age specifically, but as you think about the current employment market at the senior level, what would you like executives to understand about the trajectory as they lead into the second quarter? What does the state of hiring look like? We covered part of that from the recruiter standpoint, but I'd like to understand, what do you wish executives knew about search in 2021? How is it different, for example, than it was before?
The opportunities are, I haven't seen this level of activity in the market in my 20 plus years of doing executive recruiting. The market is on fire right now with opportunities and growth and new businesses, so the building sophistication earlier and earlier. And what I mean by that, it used to be that a startup was almost going through a maturity cycle before they really started investing in broader, more capable executives. Organizations are doing it faster, whether it be from influences from SPACs and companies going public faster, or it's just this enlightenment around an organization if they invest in that upfront. Does happens. And so all these things are for great leaders, great executives to come in. And so what I would encourage people to do, it's also just transparency with the employer. Also be transparent recruiter and understand their role. Executive recruiter retained by client organizations and their interest, but as any interest by first, when I don't think a culture fit is going to be right for the individual. Let's do this for the long haul in mind, not about getting finish line. And so with the interest of that candidate is when they're transparent things like, don't necessarily that just because you're over 40 that you should keep your knowledge off a resume. Have them on there, because the downside of not including it, you're fundamentally back, and it plants a psychological around what else are they holding back. And so if someone doesn't accept it, if they don't like it, well, you don't want to really be affiliated with them anyway, right? So get over it. You're going to find a great home for you. Everybody has a great home waiting for them. It's just a dig. But at least if you're transparent, you're putting yourself out there, what you're going to do is you're going to better position yourself to find somebody who embraces you for every gift you're bringing to the table. And that makes for a much longer stay, so you don't have to go through that job search anytime soon again. And that's what I encourage folks to do.
Such great advice. Thank you, Jason, for making time for talking to me. I'm sure our audience will love to hear what you have just shared with me. So I look forward to more of this in the future. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Bye
and
for now.
hopefully it helps somebody.
Absolutely.